Well, guys, I want to thank each and every one of you for being here this morning. Of course, I want to thank Eric for inviting me here and giving me the opportunity to share my story. Last month, I came to a meeting. It was the first one I'd ever been to, and it was Connor Shaw. And wow, I mean, what a great morning that was. Connor, for being such a young man and talking about his successes, his family life, his trials that he went through, his near-death experience, and how God brought him through all of that. And so many things that he talked about that he left out there for us to take with us, and I think I'll call them nuggets. And one of the nuggets that stuck with me was that Connor said, always find a teammate. And that stuck with me. As we go through life and we have successes, we tend to want to celebrate by ourselves and pat ourselves on the back. But what we need to do is look back behind us and find that teammate, because there's always someone that helped you along the way to help get you to where you are. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. I'm excited for this group, and what I see is a group of men that come together and lift one another up, and your goal is to be more Christ-like. And in the end, it flows into every part of your life, whether it's being a better husband or father. I'm not going to lie to you. If I seem nervous, it's because I am. But last month when things were over and I went home and Connor had finished, and I went home and Satan just started talking to me and whispering in my ear, and he was telling me, Eddie, how are you going to top that, Connor Shaw? He's a famous quarterback in South Carolina. Who are you? How are you going to impact these guys? Let me tell you a little short, quick story, a true story. It was 1980. I was 21, 22 years old. It was a Saturday night. I was on the way home, and I stopped in a 7-Eleven. I was going to buy some beer for the next day. I went inside, got my beer, came up, put it on the counter, and there was an elderly lady. I say elderly, she might have been 40, I don't know. But she was, at the time she seemed elderly. She's probably 50 or 60. I put my beer down. I said, hey, how you doing tonight? She said, I'm fine. She went to check me out, and she stopped. And she looked at me. She said, son, what's your name? I said, Eddie Hutto. She said, well, I'm Miss McDaniel. It's nice meeting you. She said, son, I don't know why, but I feel led to say this to you, that there's something about you that I think God's going to use you one day. She said, I don't know why I'm saying that, but God's going to use you. I don't know when, I don't know how. And I looked at her and I said, wow, Miss McDaniel, nobody's ever said anything like that to me. And I picked up my 12-pack of beer and I looked at her and I said, I don't know if it's true, but I'm pretty sure he's not going to use me tonight. So I left. So it's true. Anyway, I went home. A couple of days passed and I kept Miss McDaniel on my mind. So I decided to go back to the store and look for her, and she wasn't there. I went back on multiple times at different times, and I never could contact her. And it's funny that the other employees didn't seem to know who she was. I started thinking, I said, is this some just little old lady that was trying to be kind to me and say something to lift me up, or was it God that sent me an angel to give me a message? I don't know. I don't know, and I don't know to this day. But that's why I'm here today. Psalm 40, verse 2 is kind of one of my main verses. It says, he lifted me up from a horrible pit, out of the miry clay. He set my feet on solid rock, and he established my goings. That's what God did for me over the years. I want to tell you my story. I was born and raised right here in Florence, South Carolina. I grew up on Edisto Drive. It was one block from the stoplight at Cherokee Road. When my mom died, me and my brother and my sister we all spoke at her funeral. And I remember my brother talking about Edisto Drive. He said, Edisto Drive was the center of the universe. It was. He said, everything good happened at Edisto Drive. Kids would come over, family would come over. My mom and dad made everybody welcome. My dad was a mailman. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. So we didn't have a lot of money, but my mom and dad, they were able to provide us with everything we ever needed, a lot of things that we wanted. We ate meals together. We went on small vacations together. But the biggest thing about my mom and dad, they were two of the strongest Christians, two of the strongest believers in Christ that you'll ever see. And they instilled that in us. They made sure we were at church every Sunday, Sunday school every Sunday. I remember getting awards for Bible verse memorization. I remember that my grammar school teachers would send home notes on my report card saying, it's amazing how Eddie knows the Bible. He's always talking about the Bible. And I think what they were saying is, we wish Eddie would take as much time with his schoolwork as he did learning the Bible. But anyway, that's the kind of environment that I grew up in. And you would think when you hear that, how a young man, how he wouldn't go to school, finish high school, possibly go to college, get a degree, get a job, meet a girl, get married, raise a family. My brother did that. My sister did that. But for some reason, it just wasn't meant for me at that time. My dad, he was a great sports enthusiast. He loved high school baseball, high school basketball, football. He loved college sports. He was a high school baseball and American Legion umpire. And I can remember going with my dad as a little boy to the games. And on Edisto Drive, center of the universe, I can remember in our backyard, countless days and hours, me and my dad in the backyard throwing ball together. He would pitch to me, and I'd take batting practice. And you got to realize this was all in fun. He wasn't one of those drill sergeants trying, but we did it all in fun. It didn't take my dad long to realize that I had a talent for baseball. And at age 7, he took me over to Royal School for tryouts for small fry, I guess it was. And when we went, it didn't take, the coaches realized that my level of play was probably much more than the other guys that were there. By age 8, they moved me up to the older boys to play. And I started out as a catcher, and I loved catching. I loved trying to throw people out, stealing second and third base. But that's when they realized I had a strong arm, and they tried me out for pitching. And it was then that I realized that that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a pitcher. At age 9, my dad got me out in the backyard again. He taught me how to throw a curveball. 9-year-old throwing curveballs. And I worked and worked on that pitch until I got it perfected. I could throw it over the top, 3/4, sidearm, submarine, it didn't matter. And my fastball at age 9, 10 years old, I could throw it faster than most guys my age and most guys older than me. At 10, I was pitching, I was winning, my name was in the paper all the time. And people started coming around and to watch me pitch. And I think the phrase was coined, we're going to watch the little boy with the big arm. And that kind of stuck for a while. By age 12, at the end of Little League, I won Most Valuable Player, and I've got a picture from 1970. And some of these names you may know, some of you may not. But me, Tommy Head, Mike Wilson standing there in 1970 with our most valuable trophies in the city. And that meant a lot to me. I went on to Pony League, All-Stars, Most Valuable Player. By the time I got to junior high, things started changing a little bit. Everybody around town, and you got to realize Florence was a lot smaller back then than it is now. But everybody knew me as the baseball player. But when I got to junior high, things started changing a little bit. Girls started to come into play. And socially, I just wasn't comfortable. I was shy. I wasn't that guy that when you walk into a room that everybody knew you were there. I kind of was in the background. I did have a girlfriend during that time, but all I could think about is I wanted to get to high school. I wanted to play high school baseball. I wanted to play with that level of guy that my dad used to umpire. Finally, high school got here. I remember walking into West Florence that first day, and I was just blown away by the number of people that were there. There was probably 1,500 students at the time. And there were seniors, juniors, sophomores, all these kids that were older than me. And I felt so out of place. I felt uncomfortable. Eventually, me and my girlfriend broke up like so many times. The younger girls were attracted to the older guys because they had cars and driver's license and all that. So here I was. I found myself all alone. I had a couple of buddies, but all I could think about was when tryouts for baseball would come. Finally, the day came, and I went out for the baseball team as a freshman, and I made the varsity team. But I was put into a role that I just wasn't comfortable with. I was sitting on the bench. I'd never sat on the bench before, but the coach would let me, pitch batting practice and things like that, but all the positions were taken by the older guys. Well, each game came along and I sat on the bench. And finally, toward the end of the season, my coach yelled out, "Hutto, get loosened up, you're going in." I couldn't believe it. I was finally going to get to go into a high school ball game. And I went in and I pitched 2 innings, and I didn't disappoint. And I remember after the game, my coach came up to me, he said, "You look good out there, son." And I walked away. I was so happy. I really was. I finally got to play. Anyway, sophomore year came. I made it to the starting rotation at the time. But things started to change off the field for me. My social life was changing. Me and some friends, we would go out at night on the weekends, and we would look for things to do, and we would go to parties, and I never did have a good time. Like I said, I just couldn't connect with people like that. And I know that's common probably in high school. But one night we went out, and one of my friends had a bottle of, I think it was Seagram 7 or something like that, and they were passing it around drinking, and I was very reluctant to drink because I didn't ever grow up in that environment around alcohol, but I did. I took a drink. I took several drinks, and something happened that night, and I use this phrase, I thought I had met my new best friend that night. Alcohol made me feel different than I'd ever felt before in my life. It gave me courage that I'd never had. It made me do and say things that I'd never do under normal circumstances. As the year went by, me and the guys, we'd go out every weekend. We'd drink more and more. We started smoking pot. We started taking pills. In the 70s, everything was right there for you if you wanted it. And I was not one to turn it down. That was my personality, I guess. Baseball went well. I think I went undefeated that year. Next year came, my junior year. I've got a buddy that played with me when I was a junior, that's here tonight, or this morning. And I was the #1 pitcher on the team that year. I went undefeated. I won most valuable defensive player on the team my junior year. But off the field, my life was getting kind of out of sorts. Drinking went from the weekend to drinking on school nights. I remember drinking on a school night and riding around and riding by my mom and dad's house, and I would wait for their bedroom light to go off, and when it'd go off, then I know I could sneak in the house. Drugs became more prevalent, but my reputation was starting to change. I went from the little guy with the big arm, to the guy with the big drinking and drug problem, and I knew it. I could hear the talk. And you got to realize something that, when I was on the ball field, when I stepped across that foul line, and I stood on that mound, and I had that ball in my hand, I was in complete control. My confidence level was as high as it could possibly be. I knew that I was going to win, that I couldn't be defeated. But when I crossed that line back into the real world, I was a total mess. I went down to the beach with some friends for spring break. We went out to a bar. It was crowded. It was hot. I walked outside. There were police everywhere. They grabbed me. They threw me in the back of a wagon, and I got arrested for public drunkenness at the age of 16. Nobody knew where I was. We didn't have cell phones, so I had to call my mom and dad to come get me out of jail. Oh, that was an awful, awful night. They brought my grandmother with them to pick me up, of all things. You know. So, but anyway, I won't go into detail about things, but that was the first encounter with the law, but I did have more in my future. But anyway, my senior year came. It was my year. It was my year to shine. My name was out there. Scouts were interested in me. I had a few come talk to me already from a couple of different colleges, but my senior year was going to be my big year. The only obstacle I had was my crosstown rival, South Florence, was the #1 team in the state. They were loaded with talent, guys that I grew up with, played with, against. One guy in particular, his name was John Holland. Y'all may know John. John was I would say, one of the best ball players ever to come out of Florence. He was a great catcher. He was a great hitter. He was a great pitcher. He could throw it. Anyway, it came time to play South Florence. And I remember a lot of people were there. John was pitching. I was pitching. There were college scouts there. There were pro scouts there. And I realized most of them were there to see John, but I was there. They had to see me too. One of the biggest games in Florence, I think. John and I pitched, we battled. We went into the bottom of the 9th inning, and John had a perfect game going. Several strikeouts, no walks. I had a no-hitter going, but I'd walked a couple of batters. John mowed us down 1, 2, 3 in the top of the 9th. They came to bat. John came up to the plate. I made the biggest mistake of my life. Wind was blowing out right field a little bit. I threw him my outside high fastball, and he reached out and hit it, and it just kept going. Went over the fence, home run. Game was over. I was devastated. I mean, I pitched the best game of my life in a loss. But anyway, after the game, things turned, though. I was leaving the game, and all of a sudden, all these scouts were coming up and talking to me. Even one of the pro scouts came up to me, and I'll always remember what he said. He said, "Son," he said, "with that fastball and that curveball you got, it's one of the best I've ever seen." He said, "if you go to school and you get on a weight program and you put on 20, 25 pounds, you'll go a long way." I said, "Man, thank you for saying that." Well, I had some offers. I could have gone to the Citadel, could have gone to Wofford, Presbyterian, a couple of smaller schools like Spartanburg Methodist. And I sat down with my mom and dad to talk about what to do. And this changed my life. My mom looked at me and she said, "Eddie, we know you love baseball, but you have a problem, son. You're 17 years old and you're an alcoholic. And we just can't see letting you go away from home now, because if you do, you're either going to get in trouble or you're going to die, and we could never live with ourselves." I didn't know what to say or do, but I love my parents, and I tried to obey them the best I could. They said, "We want you to stay home, go to Francis Marion." I said, "Okay." Well, I was playing American Legion ball that year, and the coach was Tom Davison, and he was also the assistant coach out at Francis Marion. I think my mom and dad or my dad talked to him, and Coach Davison came to me and came to Tommy Head, my buddy. He said, "I want you to come out to Francis Marion and play ball." He said, "Eddie, I want you to come out there and pitch. But what I want you to do is I want you to use this time to get your life straight." I said, "Okay." So I went to Francis Marion, went to fall practice. Tommy and I, we did well. We were going to be on a team. But during that time, Tommy and I, we had a hard time going to class. I guess Tommy and I spent a lot of time in the rec room playing pool, ping pong. Tommy lived down the road. We'd go to his house. We'd drink beer, smoke pot. We'd go out at night, drink. It's just a repetitious, every day, every night. I got a letter from the dean of students saying that my GPA had dropped below where it should be, and that I was on probation. I could come back to school the next semester and get them up, but at that time I couldn't play baseball. I didn't know what to do. I was lost. I said, heck, I know I'm not going to do this, so I quit. So here I was, 18 years old, no education, no job. My baseball career was over. I floundered around for a while, and I found out that they were offering jobs on second shift at Lazy Boy Chair Company. So Tommy and I both went out to Lazy Boy. We got a job on second shift, and it was a terrible job. I mean, it was manual labor. We were loading and unloading rolls of fabric off of trucks and onto another one. Dirty, hot, 50 to 100 and something pound rolls, in and out all day. A couple of months went by. They offered Tommy and I both a position on first shift, and we took it. So here I was, 19 years old, first shift job, making a little bit of money, had benefits, and all the guys on that shift, they were about our age, 19 to 25, and they none of them were married, so we all had a lot in common, and we would work, and then we'd leave and we'd go out and party together. Every night we'd go out drinking. We'd go to the bars. We'd go to the nightclubs. We'd stay out all night. We would take pills. I mean, anything and everything went. We would get up the next morning, do it again. That went on for a while. I remember going out to lunch one day. My shirt was filthy dirty from carrying those rolls of fabric. And I walked into the Safeway to get some lunch. And a guy that I knew that I played ball with, he was a little older. His name was David Shaw. David was in there and he looked at me. He said, "Eddie, is that you?" I said, yeah. He said, "Man, son, what do you do for a living now? You digging ditches or something?" And that really hurt. So I said, I got to do something. So I decided to go back to school, and I went to tech at night. I would work all day full time, get off work, clean up, go to tech. I was taking computer programming, and when I got out of school, I would go out drinking, or I'd go home and drink all night, get up the next morning, do it all over again. I finally, and it took a long time doing that to graduate. But in 1985, and I'd been doing this hard job since 1977, I met a girl. She was formerly from Florence. She came from a real good family in Florence. She was living in Barnwell, South Carolina, and I would go see her on the weekends. She would come to Florence. And she'd moved back to Florence, and we got engaged. And we were going to get married. I bought a house. I fixed it up. We would marry, live in that house. But for some reason, we couldn't ever pull the trigger. Now, when I met her, I quit with the drugs. I did. But she and I, we still had a drinking relationship. Everything we did seemed to be evolved around drinking. But we couldn't seem to pull the trigger and decide when to get married. So she moved away to Columbia, and I found myself going to Columbia to see her. But eventually, we decided it wasn't going to work, and we broke it off. So here I was. It was 1990, 91. I was 31, 32 years old. I was all alone living in this house. At the time, I had a buddy of mine that was renting the house, and I told him, I said, you ought to get out of this rent and come live with me. You pay me a little bit of rent, you can save a lot of money, and I can make some money, and it'll work out good. So he did. And also about this time, my buddy, Tommy Head, we had both been promoted. Tommy was the department head, and I was his assistant. And Tommy, a good friend of mine, Mike Wilson, invited Tommy to Sandhurst, church at Sandhurst. And Tommy went. He loved it. And eventually, Tommy trusted Christ as his Savior. Tommy would come to work with his Bible. He was on fire for the Lord. And he would call me in his office in the morning and say, let's have Bible study. And I'd be hungover, and I'd say, yeah, sure, let's do it, And so we would sit there and have Bible study, and it was good. In the meantime, after my girlfriend and I broke up, I got back into going out at night to the bars. I got back into taking pills and things. And I noticed I would go out at night and I would come home and my buddy would be in his bedroom with the door locked or door shut. And he'd be in there with another friend. And I always wondered what they were doing. One night I walked in and they were smoking crack cocaine. And they would offer it to me, and I said, no, I don't want anything to do with that. There was 2 things I promised myself a while back, and I said, number 1, I'll never stick a needle in my body to get high. Number 2, I never want to smoke crack cocaine because I'd heard so many things about it, that it was Satan's drug. One night, I guess I went out, I came home, I walked in the room. They said, you want to try it? And I said, yeah, sure, why not? And I took a hit. And guys, I want to tell y'all right now, I took that hit and I was done. After that night, for 4 years, my life just totally spiraled out of control. Every night, every day I would go to work, I would get off work and I would go over to the wrong side of town, but the side of town, and I would buy crack cocaine, I would go home and I would stay up all night long and smoke. And then I would go to work the next day. I would go to Bible study in the morning with Tommy before we started work. And Tommy knew something was going on. But there were times I got behind in my house payment. There were times when I would be sitting in my den in the afternoon and my electricity would go off because I couldn't pay my bill. But it didn't bother me. I would sit there and smoke crack. It was that addictive. I can remember so many times, and more than one time, that I'd go over to the side of town where I would buy. It'd be 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. Guys would jump in my car and they would stick a gun in my side. They would take my money, But did that stop me? No, not at all. I would go find more money and I would go back till I found it. One time I had a gun stuck to my head. Crack cocaine is something you just never, ever want to deal with. Things were getting bad. I was still working. Tommy came to me and he said, Eddie, I want you to come to Sandhurst and visit. I said, sure, why not? So I went to Sandhurst. I went and I really liked it. I really liked Pastor Bob Norris. He was great. I went several times, and each time Pastor Bob would be at the door, and he would be greeting people as they left, and I would shake his hand and tell him, I'm Eddie. He said, one day I was in Food Line, and I came around the corner at Food Line, and Bob and I actually bumped carts together. And he looked at me, he said, you're Eddie, aren't you? And I said, yes, sir. He said, son, you're struggling, you're looking for something. I said, yes, sir, I think I am. He said, well, let's get together and talk. So I invited him to my house. I took a day off of work so my roommate wouldn't be there, and Bob came over. We sat at my kitchen table, ate lunch, and Bob started presenting the gospel to me. And I told Bob, I said, Bob, you don't understand. Everything you're saying, I know. I've heard this all my life. I grew up with it. He said, Eddie, you don't understand. Just because you have it in your head doesn't make you a Christian. You have to trust Christ in your heart. I said, okay. Bob was getting ready to leave, and he looked at me and he said, Eddie, we started a new class. He was having it at his house. He lived right off of Marsh Avenue on Pinckney. He said, we're starting a new class at my house. It's called Single and Single Again. And we're having a cookout this Friday, and I want you to come. I looked at Bob. I said, Bob, I probably won't be there. I don't have anything in common with these people. Don't look for me, but I appreciate it. He said, well, if you change your mind this Friday. Well, that week went by. I did my normal going, smoking crack. Friday came, and I had a choice. I got to the stop sign. I could have taken a left and gone over to East Florence, where I normally go, where I could have taken a right and gone to Bob Norris's house. And at the last second, I chose to take a right. And I went to Bob's house. And I pulled up into his house, and there were several cars. I sat there. I was reluctant to go in. But I went up to the door, and I walked in. And guys, I want to tell you that that day, going in that house, changed my life forever. It really did. I didn't know it, but it changed my life. And I walked in, and the first person I met, and I didn't know this at the time either, would ultimately become my wife. Her name was Hilda Wilkie at the time. Hilda was a widow. She had lost her husband tragically 2 years before, and she was left with 2 young kids to raise. And it's funny, Hilda grew up in Florence just like I did. She went to South Florence, I went to West Florence. But we found out later that we had mutual friends, and found out that I even dated one of her friends, but she had no idea who I was. She had never heard my name, and I thank God for that. Because if she would have known me in high school, she would have hated me. And I wouldn't have liked her either, because she became a Christian at age 16. She was one of those that would walk the halls of high school with her Bible. You know, she wanted everybody to see her Bible. She wanted everybody to know she was a Christian. But that's the way she was. But anyway, it took a while for us to get together, but I started going to Bob's house for Sunday school. And we had a great group of people. We'd go to Sunday school, we'd leave, we'd go to church, sit together. We would do things after church together. But the thing is I was leading a double life. I was acting like a Christian with them. But when I got away from them, I would go back to my old life, and I would go and I would smoke crack and I would drink and whatever I could do. Hilda and I started getting a little more serious. I started going over to her house. We started doing some things together. I was doing things with Jonathan and Valerie. Valerie was 5 years old. Jonathan was 11. We would do things together, and we had a great time. We got along well. And I would never, ever go around them intoxicated or on drugs or anything like that. But when I left, that's when I would do it. Hilda and I started getting a little more serious. But one night, she always thought something was wrong. She said, "You're always tired." Well, I mean, I was going to work all day. I would go do something with her. I'd go out at night and stay out all night long, and I'd never get any rest. But she didn't know it was drugs. She couldn't put her finger on it. One night, things happened. I decided to go out one night. And I went and I bought, I don't know how much. Instead of going home, I rode around Florence all night long, just staying high. By that time, daylight hit. I was still just driving around. I didn't know what I was doing. 7 o'clock in the morning came. It was time to go to work. I didn't bother to go to work. I rode around some more, and I finally went home. And I sat down and I said, I don't know what I'm going to do. So I got up and I got in my car and I rode over to Edisto Drive, and my mom and dad were there. And I walked in. They said, "Son, what are you doing here? Why aren't you at work?" I said, "Mom, Dad, I've got a problem." I said, "I'm hooked. I'm a crack cocaine addict." They said, "Well, we didn't know if that was it, but we knew there was something wrong, son. I'm glad you finally came to us." I called Tommy. Tommy came over to my mom and dad's. Tommy had talked to another friend of ours. He's no longer with us. His name is Andy Anderson. And Andy told Tommy, he said, "Tommy, if you love Eddie, you'll go over there and you'll terminate his job right now, because Eddie has to hit bottom before he can make his way back up." So Tommy came over to my mom and dad's house, and he said, I don't have any other choice, but I have to fire you." He left. I didn't know what to do. I was just, my life was over, I felt. I went back in my old bedroom and I laid down on the bed. By that time, Hilda shows up at my mom and dad. My mom and dad loved Hilda. They thought she was the best thing that ever happened to me. Hilda came in the house. She came back to my room and she laid down beside me and she put her arms around me and she said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "No, I've messed everything up." And she looked at me and she said, "We're gonna beat this." I looked at her, I said, "What do you mean, we're gonna beat this?" I said, "If you're smart, you'll get up right now and you'll run as hard and fast and far away from me as you can possibly get." She said, "No, I know who you are, Eddie. I know you can beat this." Anyway, she got up to leave. She told me not too long ago that my mom stopped her and said, "Hilda, you probably need to distance yourself from this." But she did. She left. A couple of days went by. I was staying at Mom and Dad's just for my own safety. I told my mom, I'm gonna go for a while. She said, "No, don't go." She was afraid. She was feared for me. I said, "No, I'm going for a walk." It was kind of a drizzly day. And I crossed over Edisto Drive and I was walking back in the neighborhood. And I started walking and like I say, it was kind of misty rain. I didn't know, I was just thinking, what am I gonna do? And I stopped and I looked up into the heavens and I just said, "God, I have made a complete mess out of my life. I have destroyed my life and I don't know what to do." I said, "I know I've known you all my life, but I said, I need you to come into my heart now, please. Please take this desire that I have for drugs and alcohol. Take it away from me. And if you do that, I promise, God, that I will live my life to the best of my ability for you." Well, I walked a little while longer and I went back home and I walked in. Mom said, "Well, how was your walk?" And I said, "Mom," I said, I don't know. I said, "I think things are going to be all right, but I trusted Christ while I was at." She said, "That's wonderful, son." Anyway, believe it or not, later that day, Tommy came back over to my mom and dad's house. And he came and he said, "Eddie, I love you like a brother, and I just can't do this." I said, "I can't fire you from your job. It would destroy you." He said, "You can stay at work, but you got to go get some help." I said, "Hey, I'll do anything." So I went to outpatient counseling for a little bit, and I met a guy named Lewis Foster, and we talked. But I felt the presence of God in me, and I was just all of a sudden, I was on fire for God. I went back to work, and things were good. Hilda and I got real serious. We got engaged, and it was funny. We were engaged, and Hilda would go places, and she'd see people she know, "I'm engaged to get married." "Well, who are you going to marry?" "Eddie Hutto." "Are you kidding me? Are you sure you want to do that?" You know. But anyway, and I would tell people the same thing. "I'm engaged to get married." "Who are you marrying?" "Hilda." "Eddie, you've never been married, man. You're going to get married and you're going to have a ready-made family all at one time. You sure you want to do that?" I said, "I know I do. I know this is where God wants me to be." And we got married November of 1996. In the meantime, we were married for a little while. Tommy and his wife, Angie, decided they wanted to be missionaries. And just all of a sudden, Tommy and Angie, she quit her job at McLeod as a nurse. Tommy quit his job as head of the department at Lazy Boy. They sold everything and they moved to the jungles of Peru to be a missionary. Great story. So I got offered the job as head of the department. So here within a year's time, I get off of drugs and alcohol. I trust Christ as my Savior. I get married. I get a promotion at work. I mean, things were great. Things were great. A few months into my job, I realized I hated it. I couldn't stand to work. I didn't like working in the manufacturing anymore. I had a business idea, and I went to Hilda. I said, "There's an oil change place on the west side of town, north side of town, east side of town, but there's nothing on the south side." I said, "I want to go into the oil change business." She said, "You don't know anything about it." I said, "But I will." She said, "Well, I'll back you in anything you want to do." So I called my brother. He said, "Let's do it." And we called Texaco. They came and ran the numbers. We found some property. And on Second Loop Road, they said, "This is a great location." We went to the bank. We walked in with our suits and ties on, with a business plan. And they loved it. They said, "Let's do it." And they loaned us $550,000 to build our first store. In 1998, we started building that store. I quit my job at Lazy Boy. I had no income coming in, but God was good to us. We built that first store. 6 months later, we opened on April Fool's Day, 1999. I remember that. 6 months later, a store came available in Hartsville. We went back to the bank. We want to buy this store. Let's do it. We bought a second store. 6 months later, two more stores, the one out on Cashwell and Pine Needles Road came available. We leased those two. We ended up buying the Cashwell. A few months later, we bought a store in Conway. A few months later, we bought Quality Oil and Lube on Irby Street. A few months later, we bought land in Sherrill, South Carolina, and built another shop there. Here we were with 7 shops, a mobile oil change unit. We were flying high. Everything was going good. For a few years, we did that. In 2007, Jiffy Lube came to us and offered to buy us out. It was a good offer. It really was. And my brother, he was almost 10 years older than me. He wanted to take it. I was 49. And I said, if I take this, it's good money, but I can't live on it forever. I'm going to have to go out and get a job. So I decided at that time, I'm just going to buy you out. So I bought him out. Here I was in 08. I just turned 50. I had these stores. I was doing everything by myself, the payroll, paying the bills, doing the inventory, the sales, everything that came along with it, I was handling myself. And it was a lot of stress. I'd be on my way to Sherrill and they'd be calling me from Conway with a problem. Hilda was worried about me. And I don't know exactly when it was, but I went to Hilda. It was probably 2008 or 2009. I went to her. I said, honey, it's been 12, 13 years since I've had a drink or any drugs. I said, I think I've proven that I don't have to drink, but it sure would be nice to come home on a Friday night, cook a steak on the grill, have a beer. She said, that's fine if you think you can handle it. I said, yeah, I know I can. So I'd go to the store and I'd get me one beer, just one beer. And I did that for a while, one beer. And after a few months of that, I graduated to 2 beers. And after a while, I graduated to 2 beers, the big beers. But in my mind, I was rationalizing it. And then a lot of time had gone by, but one day I crossed the line and I stopped by the liquor store and I got a little bottle of, I think, vodka. And I'd put it in my coat and I'd be grilling and I'd sip it. And I remember Hilda saying, that beer, it sure is affecting you a lot more than it used to. I said, well, I don't know, maybe I'm just tired. But I know I'm running out of time, but to make it shorter, before I knew it, I was back full-fledged drinking every day. My marriage was suffering. My business was suffering. I had to do something, and I made a decision, and this was a hard decision for me. Reeves Cannon, who is here today, he was a counseling pastor at Sandhurst. But what made it hard was Reeves was a good friend of my son's back when he was a teenager. He used to come to my house. I called Reeves. I said, I need to come in and talk with you. So we got together, and I told him what was going on. I think Reeves was shocked. But he said, Eddie, we're starting a new program here at Sandhurst. It's called Celebrate Recovery. It's a 12-step program based on scriptures, just like AA, but based on the scriptures. So I said, I'm in. So I dove in head first, and I submersed myself in this program, and I ended up in leadership role. I was there every Monday and Friday night. And through this program, I realized I got my life back. And what I realized at the time, there's a story in the book of Luke how Jesus' family every year, they would go to Jerusalem for the Passover. They would all get together, Jesus' parents, his brothers, his sisters, his aunts, his uncles, they would all go to Jerusalem for Passover. They got to Jerusalem, they had the Passover meal, and they left. They got about a days out. Somebody says, anybody seen Jesus? He said, well, no, he's probably back there with some of the other family members. They looked, he wasn't there. They went back to Jerusalem. They found Jesus in the temple teaching. But what that said to me was, and this is what I think happened to me, is I let my business become my God in my life. And I didn't realize it. I thought God was there, but I had pushed him little by little away. I quit praying in the morning. I quit involving God in my decisions. He was there, but I had left him. And I fell. Satan attacked my weakness, and I fell. But thank God for Celebrate Recovery and Reeves Cannon and Church at Sandhurst. They put their arms around me. Hilda and our marriage is better than ever now. And guys, I have to stop and say this. If you guys that are married out there, if you love your wife more than I love my wife, it's a miracle, because I don't think I could love my wife any more than I do. I know for a fact that God put us together at the right time. He sent me another angel in my wife, and I cherish her. Years went by. 2016, I was submerged in Sandhurst, Bible studies, everything. Larry Waring, y'all may know Larry. Larry was head of the deacon board, and he came to me after church, and he pulled me in the side room. He said, Eddie, the elders and the deacons have recognized your faithfulness, and they'd like to ask you to be a part of the deacon board. Larry was shocked. I broke down in tears. I just started crying. He said, Eddie, what's wrong? I've never had anybody react like this. And I said, Larry, you don't understand. I appreciate the fact that you and the elders have recognized me. But I look at this as God recognized me. He's recognized my faithfulness, and he's asked me to serve him. And I've been a deacon now for 10 years. For 10 years this month. I don't know why things happened the way they did. I remember my sister gave me a plaque several years when I was struggling. Familiar verse, Jeremiah 29:11 said, for I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you, not to harm you. Plans to give you hope in the future. I didn't understand that verse for a long time. But later on, I started understanding it. God didn't cause me to have the problems that I had, but he allowed me to go as far as it took, as far down as it took, because he knew eventually I would see a need for him. I trusted Christ. He rewarded me. He prospered me. He gave me a wife that loved me. He gave me 2 kids that loved me, and I loved them like they're my own. It's been an amazing life. It really has. I got a lot more I can say. I know you guys have to leave. I'm gonna end with this. Hilda went out to lunch recently with the wife of her youth pastor from years back, and she was sitting at a restaurant, and this girl I knew in high school, and she knows Hilda, came up to Hilda, and she said, Hilda, I need you to do something for me. She said, yeah, Libby. She said, would you please pray for my husband? He's struggling with alcohol. He's struggling with depression. And I want him to know God and become a Christian so bad. She said, because I know if God can save Eddie Hutto, he can save anybody. And she did. At first, that really cut me. And I said, no, it's true. It's true. I went to a high school reunion a few years ago, and a buddy of mine I hadn't seen in a long time, he came up to me and he said, Eddie, you doing okay? I said, yes, I am. He said, Eddie, you are the one that everybody thought was going to make it all the way. He said, I'm sorry that things happened the way they did. I said, well, things happen for a reason. I said, but Ted, I did make it. I did make it. I became a believer in Christ, and he saved me. He saved me. I said, no man, even me, is too far away from the long arm of the Lord. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.